My own watch for a moment. Oh, is that what it is? Okay, great. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. This is a medical malpractice case which we appeal the order of the trial judge because we believe that there was a question of fact of whether the diagnosis of stress-induced dizziness was a correct diagnosis by Dr. Jan, the defendant in this case. It is our opinion that not only was it a question of fact, but that Dr. Jan's opinion lacked any foundation in the record, and the motion should have been denied in the first instance just based on Dr. Slavitt's affidavit, which was the expert on behalf of Dr. Jan. And what I mean by that is Dr. Slavitt indicated that, in his opinion, given the patient's presentation, that a referral to a neurologist or an MRA was not indicated. And then he recites the facts, which Judge Schlesinger seemingly adopts, that the dizziness was largely gone except at times of stress by October 1st. This is factually completely incorrect. By October 15th, so this man started out with blurred vision, dizziness, then he went to Texas and had what he felt like his brain moving within his skull, and he sought help. And then it became, as it says in the October 15th visit, quoting just the doctor's record, that he recites the history that his brain was moving in his skull when he was in Texas. He had 2 weeks of intense vertigo after that, persisted but was less severe. So we had a persisted but less severe. But now it's slightly worse and daily. So you have a man by October 15th who's going back to his neurologist, who's having daily complaints of dizziness. Dr. Slavitt makes the assumption that his dizziness was largely gone, and based on that clinical presentation, it was okay to not refer him to a neurologist or to refer him for an MRA. Based on our experts, the second dispute in this case was...
Counsel, didn't he also feel that the use of Xanax, he prescribed Xanax for the decedent, and that seemed to have some beneficial effects, and that therefore confirmed his diagnosis that it was stress-related dizziness?
Absolutely not, because two reasons. Xanax acts as a calming effect. So when you have blood pressure spikes, either whether it's aggravated by stress or you're jogging or whatever reason it may be, Xanax seeks to calm you and makes you feel better. It's a masking effect. But what is clear in this case is you had all three doctors, Bonomo doesn't touch upon this at all, but you have Slavitt, Dr. Shields, and Dr. Bogdasarian agreeing that the only way someone who is having dizziness can be from stress is if that person is hyperventilating or has constant sighing. And there is not one notation anywhere that this man ever sighed when he is stressed at work or hyperventilated at work. In fact, exactly the opposite is in the record. We have the technologist, Chechere, who did the testing on him, not once but twice. And she noted in the first exam that he himself reported that his symptoms were spontaneous. They occurred with no rhyme or reason. And in the records, it talks about stress as an aggravating factor, worse when stressed, which would happen, as our doctors explained, because your blood pressure goes up when you're stressed, and it puts pressure on the aneurysm. So you have in the record of this own doctor, just looking at the record, I know there was an issue whether we could look outside of the record to the wife's testimony, but just looking at the record, there's no evidence of hyperventilation outside of the office. There's no evidence of, not outside of the office, anywhere, and no evidence of repeat sighing that would lead to stress-induced dizziness. I mean, we're all dizzy, we're all stressed all the time, and we don't go walking around being dizzy. And that is a main problem, which what my doctors found was the issue with Dr. Jan. You have a medical questionnaire filled out by the decedent himself that says, I'm having transient blackouts. My brain is moving within my skull. I am dizzy. I have vertigo, which we don't really know what this means, because although the doctor diagnosed him with vertigo, each and every time he saw him, he admits it was never vertigo. And it was never defined. He said, well, he kept telling me he came back for vertigo. Well, the doctor admits it wasn't vertigo. So was it he having blackouts every time he was coming? If we look at the wife's testimony, she makes it clear that she would find him sitting with his head between his hand sitting down, and he was popping Advils, popping Tylenol. Even Dr. Beautyman's records refer to Advil and Tylenol. So this is the issue in this case. The second, stop? Yeah.
You finish it.
Okay, the second issue was there was a clear dispute of the expert opinions whether you have to have headaches as a precursor to having a symptomatic ruptured aneurysm. My doctors clearly said, both Bagdasarian and Dr. Shields, you do not. And when Judge Schlesinger asked, where's the medical support for your opinion, we provided that on a rehearing and re-argue motion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. I'm Judy Shaughnessy with Wilson Alster. I represent the respondent. Thank you for taking me out of turn. I have a procedural issue to clear up. I mentioned in my brief that judgment was entered while all this was going on. If the court would like, I'm happy to hand up the judgment. I have no objection to the appeal being deemed from the judgment. I'm just trying to clear it up procedurally if the court would prefer that.
Okay, that's fine if you have it.
Should I hand it to the officer after? As to these substantive points, the issue really is that this patient had one complaint. He described it differently, but it is very difficult to describe what it feels like to be dizzy. It's even a cut is difficult to describe, and this is more complicated than that. So sometimes he says he has transient blackouts, but Jan? I'm sorry, Your Honor.
What's difficult
So-
about saying, I feel dizzy?
Oh, there's
I don't-
nothing
I don't
difficult.
think
No,
there
sure,
is
but there
any-
are lots of ways that one can feel dizzy, Your Honor. You can feel like the room is moving, or you can feel like you're moving in the room. For a physician, and this is in Dr. Jan's testimony, for a physician, that makes a difference. But for a lay...
As to how the dizziness affected him?
Yes, Your Honor. So what he testified to is that he did question him about that. He did, and what he found out is when he talks about transient blackouts, when he checked that off on his intake form, what he is describing is this feeling like he's going to pass out. That was Dr. Jan's testimony. But let me say this, whatever the description is, whether we're talking about the room is spinning, I'm spinning, my head feels like there's something spinning in my head, these are all from an ENT point of view different symptoms, but from a patient they may not be. But what is critical here is Dr. Jan was able to reproduce exactly the symptom that the patient complained about, and that's...
So the assumption was then, that's it. That's the only possible way to reproduce these symptoms.
Oh, not at all.
That seemed to knock out every other possibility, is what you're saying?
That's not true at all, Your Honor, and Dr. Jan didn't approach it that way. Dr. Jan said, I have a differential. The way this works is I'm not going to be able to objectively confirm if this is stress-induced dizziness. This is one of those conditions where I have to give you a trial of treatment to see if it works, and this is all laid out in the expert affidavit, so he did.
Let me just ask you one question. I know you submitted our decision in Tara Brooks versus Robert April, which I know you're very familiar with.
Yes, and I know two of Your Honors,
Okay.
and I'm sure everybody else is
Yes,
also.
and as are Justice Mazzarelli and I, very familiar with that case. But don't you think this one's different?
I do. I submitted it up because I did think it has some similarities, and I thought with Your Honors on the bench it may come up, and I was prepared to talk about it. I do think
It's
that
a big
this case
difference
is
there
easier.
that the plaintiff was seen by a neurologist, unlike the plaintiff here, and in Brooks, the neurologist ordered an MRA. Wouldn't you acknowledge that those are big differences?
Well, so here, actually, I thought it went the other way. I think this is easier because he ordered the entire range of the VNG testing and because he ordered the MRI. So he got back here, Dr. Jan got back very relevant test results, and while it's undisputed between the experts that the MRI would not show a small aneurysm, it would show a large one, but he's not specifically looking for an aneurysm. He's casting a wide net because, as Your Honor said, nothing at this point is dispositive. He has to try this treatment, see if it works, see what the patient
Well,
reports
then why
back.
not do an MRA?
Well, there are any number of tests that can be done, but there's no indication to
But
do
if we
them.
know that an MRI cannot pick up a small aneurysm, then why not do the exam that can?
Because there are probably 30 or 40 other neurological conditions for which you would have to run another 30 or 40 tests, and you would
Wouldn't
each
that
time be
indicate
taking
you
a
should
stab in the dark.
send him to a neurologist? Wouldn't that indicate that?
Well, the question, Your Honor, is whether it is a departure to not suspect that it could be something that is not manifesting itself. The question is it a departure to not be able to know at that juncture, when the only complaint is dizziness, that it could be
It
this?
wasn't the only
It
complaint.
was the only complaint, Your
It was
Honor.
not the only complaint.
That's, Your Honor, respectfully, that was
Okay.
the only complaint.
It was not.
What else?
That's not how this works.
There is nothing else, Your Honor. The vision had cleared up. The tingling in the finger was diagnosed as having related to a pinched nerve, and everything else, Dr. Yan testified, he went over it with him, and when he said, now that I made you feel dizzy after the hyperventilation test, is this it?
Thank
And
you.
the patient said yes.
So,
Your Honors, really quickly,
What else did he complain of?
he complained of fatigue, repeat fatigue, and in the articles I provided, Your Honors, fatigue along with the dizziness are all signs and symptoms of a cerebral aneurysm. Transient blackouts, it's a separate item on the intake sheet for a reason. When someone comes in with a transient blackout, even Dr. Jan admitted, not one of his patients has ever, in a hyperventilation test, suffered a transient blackout. It has nothing to do with it. And be clear, a hyperventilation test is simply breathing in a bag 20 times really fast. If anyone does do this, we're going to be dizzy. That means absolutely nothing in ruling out a life-threatening disease. MRI, MRA, rule out any diseases of the brain that could be it. Our doctors showed the different ways it could be, whether it's a irritation, meningeal irritation, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. The only thing Dr. Bonomo focused on was one thing, a sentinel bleed prior to rupture. That's separate and distinct, and he never discussed meningeal irritation, vasodilation, vasoconstriction, all the other methods of, or even microbleeds that lead to dizziness and can be episodic over a long period of time until the aneurysm finally ruptures. Especially an anterior communicating artery aneurysm in a young man. Those are the most common and could be treated. And Mr. Arroyo would be here today if he had been treated and just sent out. I mean, we're talking over a year of dizziness, brain moving in your skull. Now, by October 15th, it's daily, and the doctor says, it's stress-induced. You're a hedge fund manager. It's okay. You don't need to come back. He actually says to him, you don't need to come back, although his condition was daily. This is a father of 2 kids who is now, the kids have lost their father because nothing was done. This decision should be reversed and it should go to trial.
thank you. We're back to the first case on the calendar, People versus Cortez.